welcome to my virtual couch. Happy Friday to you all. So, today I have a special guest. I am really excited about this guest, and I'm going to introduce Kelsey Wilson. I'll let her talk about herself, and then we'll go from there. Hi, Kelsey. Welcome to the virtual couch.
Hi, Pam. Thank you so much for having me on today. I'm super excited to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you. I feel like we're gonna talk about some deep stuff today.
Yes, definitely.
That people need to hear and people need to talk about because people don't want to talk about childhood trauma.
Yes, it's an important topic, and I'm so glad to be here and be able to talk more and make sure that people know the facts.
But why don't you introduce yourself and who you are and how did you get into trauma work?
Definitely, definitely. Well, my name is Kelsey Wilson. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a therapist. I'm a private practice owner. And how I got into trauma work, I come from a family that really values community service. My family opened a nonprofit for foster care youth when I was a teenager, and that really spearheaded me into doing social work. And so since then, been able to work on getting my clinical social work license and being able to serve individuals who have experienced some form of trauma in their childhood or adulthood. And it's been really rewarding work. All of my work is virtual. So clients across the state of Virginia can access the service and be able to do therapy from the comfort of their homes.
I love that. So it's literally in your lineage.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. I love that. So you have a passion for this. Okay. All right. So when we talk about trauma, that's a very, broad topic. So why don't we talk about who are the people that come to see you? Who's your clientele?
Yes. So I largely work with women who have experienced some form of trauma, depression, anxiety, burnout, life transition issues. I also do some employee assistantship program work. So clients who are experiencing work balance issues or issues in their marriage, short term. Issues that they want to address that are going on in their life right now that they really just want to come to therapy to talk about. So I provide short-term therapy and I also provide long-term therapy to clients in my private practice.
Okay. What would you define as childhood trauma?
Childhood trauma is the abuse, neglect, exploitation of a child, and it can really be physical, sexual, psychological. It can also look like emotional invalidation of a
Mm,
child, where you basically have a child who is often bullied or not paid attention to by a caregiver on an ongoing
mhm.
basis. Even single incidents can really have a big impact on children. And so it's important for the public to be aware of these things so that they can help children who are in those situations.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that you said emotional invalidation. I think sometimes when people think about childhood trauma, they're only looking at like physical abuse. So, can you talk a little bit more about the emotional invalidation?
Definitely, definitely. So, a lot of people might define it as traumatic invalidation, and that's essentially where, on an ongoing basis, your caregiver isn't pouring into you, whether they are making comments that are, invalidating to your feelings, or they're saying verbally abusive. Language to a child on an ongoing basis, or putting them in situations where that's happening on an ongoing basis through other caregivers like babysitters or family members, things of that nature.
Okay. And how do you think that the trauma shows up in present day?
Yes, so I work with adults who may have gone through something like that, and a lot of times it can present itself as low self-esteem or entering into relationships where they're seeing those similar behaviors through their partners play out, and because they're numb to those things happening, it can be hard to establish healthy boundaries and sometimes leave those relationships that aren't serving them or are patterns from their childhood.
hmm So then, how does a person know if therapy is what they need, right? Because sometimes you have people that have childhood trauma, but doesn't they don't realize that it's childhood trauma, so they've normalized it. So how does one know that hey, maybe I should go get some help to address this?
Yeah, so what happens to a lot of people is that they will start to experience difficulty with their day-to-day um, life. So whether that be their work, or they're having a hard time with caregiving, or they're having a hard time with taking care of themselves, they're having difficulty getting out of bed, or they're having anxiety or panic attacks, or they're just feeling like life is really not fulfilling. And so that's how they find themselves wanting to do something different and go to therapy and really dive deep into what is the cause of this. And sometimes they're referred by their primary care doctor or another healthcare provider that they're seeing when they go for like an annual checkup. Or they might have a colleague who's like, hey, maybe you should try therapy, or a friend.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I know that trauma and post traumatic stress disorder can be related, right? So, can we talk about what is PTSD, what we know as PTSD, and how does it relate to childhood trauma?
Definitely. So, just want to start by saying that PTSD can present differently for different people, but there are some criteria that we know of in the DSM that has to be kind of met to be full PTSD. Some people experience trauma, but it isn't meeting the full criteria for PTSD. So, just want to make sure that I point that out.
Mm-hmm.
PTSD is a disorder that can develop in some people who have experienced a life-altering event, such as sexual trauma, or a life-threatening event, or they witnessed a life-threatening event, and that would meet like criterion A of PTSD. Um, it can alter your fight or flight response. So sometimes after someone goes through a traumatic event, they might have difficulty with identifying if they're in a dangerous situation or not because of triggers. So you might have nightmares, flashbacks, startle response, difficulty with sleeping, and then avoiding situations that remind you of the trauma that you experienced. It might have an impact on your mood. You might have hypervigilance and hyperarousal concerns, and intrusive thoughts that pop into your mind due to the trauma that you experienced.
You said hypervigilance, right? What does that look like to an average person who may not realize what they're experiencing? And can you talk a little bit about what is fight or flight response?
Yes, so I will go into fight or flight response. It's where you're in a situation and your brain is telling you whether you have a real danger in front of you, or not. And so your brain is trying to decipher, do I need to freeze in this situation, or do I need to flee? And sometimes when we've experienced like a traumatic event that happened a long time ago, our senses are kind of influenced by that. And so we think that we're in a dangerous situation where we might not be. So, kind of keeping that in mind, sometimes when people go through relationships or when they're in crowds, they might perceive danger, but they're not in a dangerous situation,
Mhm,
and their brain kind of tells them that they are.
mhm, mhm. Okay. Okay. So perceived versus reality,
Yes,
and the childhood trauma impacts that.
yes,
Okay.
it can.
Does childhood trauma affect the brain? And if so, how? Is there a science behind childhood trauma?
Yes. So I think that it's important for people to know that our brain is an organ. And so when we have a traumatic experience that impacts our brain, it can alter the way that we take in and receive information. And so, kind of in a simple way to put it, when we go through trauma, our brain kind of shifts in a way. But when we go through healing, our brain is really adaptive and really can take in and soak in that healing, and kind of focus on cognitive restructuring, which is a CBT term,
Mhm,
in cognitive behavioral therapy, where we can think about situations that happened in our past differently and come up with skills that kind of help us navigate our feelings in a different way.
mhm, mhm, mhm. Very interesting. So, what would you say um, is one of the challenging things that you experience in a therapy session with somebody that might have childhood trauma? And
Yes.
what does a session look like with somebody that has childhood trauma?
Yes. So someone who comes in with childhood trauma, the first thing that we're going to do is really just listening to their experiences and what they went through, and make sure that they feel validated in their childhood experience and their life experience. And then some psychoeducation around what is childhood trauma can really be helpful, to identify what were some things that happened to me that really shouldn't have happened, that made me feel invalidated, or that made me feel unsafe. And then kind of going from there, identifying a treatment plan is the first step in all of my new client appointments, where we do an intake and identify what it is that they would like to work on over the course of treatment. And we do treatment reviews to check in and see what goals we've accomplished in therapy, what they would still like to work on, and if there's anything that needs to be adjusted to meet their needs.
Yeah, and I know we're going to do a part two, so we'll go a little bit more in depth in about that. Um, this is more of a social question, in your opinion as a clinician. Why do you think that childhood trauma is so hard to discuss? Why do you think it's, sometimes some cultures is very hush hush about it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. So in some cultures, what happens in the household stays in the household is really prominent and it's ingrained. And so it can be a touchy topic to talk about things that are going on in the household because of messages that you've heard passed down from generation to generation. So I do a lot of
Mm-hmm.
generational trauma work with individuals, and really breaking down some of those unhelpful messages that they may
Mm-hmm.
have heard, because it kind of can contribute to the trauma perpetuating down the
Mm-hmm.
lineage. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what I've noticed, sometimes comes up with some of the clients that I work with, and we
Mm-hmm.
really break it down and talk about, what were some unhelpful messages that I learned, and
Mm-hmm.
what are some new messages that I can tell myself to really heal.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's very hard to unlearn it, right? Because I'm even thinking like in my head where I've had a client say like, "Yeah, I used to hear like, don't you go telling our business out
Right.
there," So that's like a cultural thing that is like constant, right? So to even walk in the door to get help is can be difficult. So I think that is important, like you said, to talk about the unlearning the unhelpful messaging, right? Because there's an internal battle, I'm sure, that happens. How does a person uncover their childhood trauma if they've been traumatized by a person or someone that still has access to them, right? Someone that still, might be have close ties to them, like family or family friend or an associate, and so they're constantly living the trauma and they may not realize it. So how do they work on uncovering that trauma if it's still an active thing? Like it happened in childhood, but this person that traumatized me, or the situation, right, that traumatized me is still in my face.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a reality for so many people out there. So I just want to, show compassion for those people who might be watching right now, and that's your experience. And I just want to say that, it is possible to go to therapy while you're still experiencing trauma in your household. And it can really make all the difference in you making a safety plan for yourself. If that's needed, to really figure out how can I protect myself best, and what resources are available for me if I'm going through a domestic violence situation, or if I haven't fully mustered up the resources, the courage, the insight, and the supports that I need to make a decision to get out of that situation. So please do know that there are resources available, and I'm hoping we can leave some in the show notes for people who really need those resources.
Absolutely, I'm definitely going to leave some resources in the description. Are there any resources that you recommend? Just as we're talking, to begin the work of childhood trauma.
Oh, definitely. So, for those who are interested in connecting with a therapist, I would definitely say hopping onto directories like Psychology Today, Inclusive Therapist, mental health match therapy for Black girls, therapy for Black men. And you can also reach out to your insurance and they will send you a list of in network providers. If you have a job where they offer employee assistantship program benefits, you can access free therapy through that program. Or if you have someone in your household with those benefits, you might also be eligible to utilize their benefits to access therapy.
Hmm. Yeah, you mentioned employee assistance program. A lot of people don't utilize that service,
Yes.
and they don't realize that that service is there. How does childhood trauma become generational?
Yes. So that's a really great question. I think it comes from oftentimes parents may have witnessed something that was traumatic to them, and then it gets ingrained into the way that they behave, the way that they parent, and then those patterns and behaviors play out into how they parent and how they communicate with their children. And
Mhm,
then that in turn teaches children how to parent and behave. And so it kind of just goes down the lineage like that.
mhm,
Um, and it can be kind of hard to break through some of those cycles, especially when
mhm,
that's what you're accustomed to. But
mhm,
one of the things that I can say that I'm really happy about working with some of my clients is like when they do break out of those cycles,
mm.
it's a sight to see. And
Yeah,
it's one of the reasons why I love doing this work, honestly.
yeah, yeah. And I'm sure it's new territory, right? Because they've spent their whole lives just, you know, normalizing unhealthy patterns and behaviors to live a different life. Yeah. Is it hard for them sometimes? Like, okay, like now I've had this breakthrough, I've evolved, right? So how do I move about the world now? Almost like how do I know that this therapy thing is working?
Exactly, exactly. I think that sometimes once you have come to a place where you've broken through some of those old patterns that you find no longer helpful, it is about self-discovery and really identifying like what does that mean for me and what does that mean for my identity if I'm no longer kind of doing some of these old things that I used to do? Do I still enjoy hanging out with the same people that I used to hang out with? Do I still enjoy going to the same places I used to go to? So it's really
Mhm,
just getting to know yourself all over again. And sometimes that's in your mid 20s and your 30s, 40s,
mhm,
50s, and you're really trying to learn yourself all over again.
mhm,
And being in therapy while you're going through that process can really be helpful because it can be a little bit shocking sometimes when you see how different you are after you finish
mhm.
that healing process.
Yeah. Like I have a client, we've been working on some childhood trauma stuff. And she said, now that I'm in therapy, I just realized that my family's very dysfunctional.
Mm,
Right. So now she is working on herself and she notices all the chaos and dysfunction around her and it's like, oh, wait a minute, now I've got to set some boundaries. Oh, wait a minute, now I've got to do different. So how do I navigate? Like I can't change my family members, I can't change my friends behaviors, attitudes, but now I have to kind of do different. Sometimes I have clients that say like, man, why do I've got to be the bigger person, right? Because you're the one that's in therapy, that's working on yourself. You're the one that's like going through the healing process, right? So sometimes that could be difficult too.
yeah, it can be. And establishing healthy boundaries with people that you've had a hard time with over the years, and that's why you're coming to
Mhm,
therapy to kind of work on can be really hard, but once you do set those boundaries, then you can kinda decide, like, "Is this person gonna honor my boundaries, now that I've
mhm,
set them?" Because if you set boundaries and then someone continues to cross your boundaries and not honor your boundaries, then it's
mhm.
like, "Okay, so do I continue to allow that person to do that, or do I make the decision to not allow that anymore?"
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Is a person ever fully healed from their childhood trauma? I get this question a lot.
You know what? I think that it is possible to heal from childhood trauma. And not to say that you forget, it's just that you're living in a place where you have acknowledged that it happened. And now you're in a place where you're feeling much better, you're feeling healthier, you're handling relationships differently, you're treating yourself with kindness and compassion. So I think
Mhm,
it's like possible to heal and just,
mhm,
it's not, it's a memory. You still have
mhm,
it, but it feels different.
yeah. What do you say when people say like, I just don't know why I haven't gotten over this.
Mhm.
I'm 30 some years old. This thing happened to me when I was 4 years old. Why is it still showing up now? Why haven't I gotten over this?
Yeah, and I think that that's a good question to ask because sometimes people will go through therapy and not find the right fit or may not find the right intervention that works for them, and so then they think that therapy can't help them or that they're not able to move past things that have happened in the past, but it might just be a matter of, like, trying to find the therapist that's the right fit for you and finding the
Mhm,
right intervention that works.
mhm.
So I wanna encourage everyone, if you've tried to work on it and it hasn't been successful in the past, that doesn't mean that you won't have that happen for you when you find the right fit, therapist and intervention.
Yeah, and I would say if it's not working, fire your therapist and find another one.
Yeah,
It's not about your therapist, it's about you.
yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes people might try therapy one time, right?
Mhm.
It was already hard coming through the door. And then they might try therapy one time and then go, oh, I didn't like the therapist. This isn't working. I'm like, don't take one, and negative or, ineffective one therapy experience and then generalize it to, okay, now therapy doesn't work. So that's it. So yeah, I'm glad that I'm hearing you say, don't give up, find another one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you're in different seasons in your life. And, therapy might be the instead of doing it in the preventative stage, like you're doing it when you're at your peak, like you can't take any more. And that's kind of like the last ditch effort to try to work on it. And so it might be you need a season of rest and then get at it again and try to work on
Sometimes
it.
it's okay to take a break.
Right.
Yeah, and come back at it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. This has been great. Can you? So we're definitely going to do a part two. However, can you tell us what are your handles? How do people reach you, find you? Are you accepting new clients?
Yes. So, people who are interested, please follow me on Instagram, Kelsey Wilson PLLC. You can also visit my website, um, kelseywplc.com. And I'm also able to, you can reach out to me by email, therapy at kelseywplc.com. I'm currently full and very happy about it. It's been my first year in private practice, and I'm full at this time. But I encourage people to follow my website. I post availability there once I am accepting new clients.
You're busy, which is a great thing.
Yeah.
Congratulations. That's great
Yes.
for your first year in private practice.
Yes.
That's
Thank you so
awesome.
much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. We're gonna do a part two. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.